Hi, everyone. Welcome to GoLean6Sigma.com's webinar. Thanks for spending some quality time with us today. Hundreds of people have registered for this webinar, and we are really excited that you're all here. Lean and Six Sigma are the go-to improvement methods used by leading organizations all over the world to drive operational excellence, delight customers, achieve their missions, and build problem-solving cultures. Every month, we craft webinars just for you, our global learner community, webinars that simplify process improvement concepts and tools so you can apply them more easily and get results. So today's webinar is titled, How to Build Best Practices with Standard Work. I'm Taiichi Ohno. I'm a managing partner at GoLean6Sigma.com, and today's presenter is also a managing partner at GoLean6Sigma.com, my colleague, the wonderfully talented, innovative, and constantly passionate about learning, Elizabeth Swan. How are you today, Elizabeth?
I'm awesome, Tracy. Thank you, as usual, for a lovely intro.
Sure, and I'm going to tell them more about you. So she is the co-host of the Just in Time Cafe podcast with me, and she's also the co-author of the Problem Solvers Toolkit with me, and she's an instructor for UC San Diego's online Green Belt program, and she's been a Lean Six Sigma consultant, Master Black Belt coach, and trainer for over 25 years. Aside from almost 3 decades in the business, she started when she was 6. Elizabeth has also performed with Improv Boston. So half of process improvement is improvisation, and that's a great combo. As a matter of fact, you should all go to improv.
Definitely.
Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and an answer session. However, please feel free to ask questions at any time by entering them into the chat window. There's a Q&A area too, but we're going to prefer that you use the chat window throughout the webinar, please. We also welcome you to participate in voting in some polls. And if we can't answer all your questions during the webinar, we'll get those answers posted on our website and in the Go-Getter forum. A copy of the slides will also be available on our site. We still get that as the #1 question. And also, these webinars are available for free. This particular webinar is an introductory level webinar, so it will be available on our website. So please join us for our first activity, sharing where you're from. Hundreds of people, like I said, have registered all over the world, and we love to hear and see where you guys are joining us from today and how late some people are up. So go ahead and type where you're from in the chat window, please.
Where are they from, Tracy?
Well, we have Eric from Dublin, Ireland, Atlanta, Minnesota, Tiffany from Napa Valley, Eamon from San Diego. We have Valerie from Bethel, Alaska, and Gregory from Omaha, Nebraska. I'm sorry, Omaha, Nebraska.
New states.
And Lola from Lagos, Nigeria. We've got some folks from Minnesota, from St. Helena, California, and from Lloyd from Ontario. Thanks for joining us today. And Matthew Dickinson says, Baltimore, MD, exclamation point triple.
He's very excited about Baltimore.
All right. Got a really robust group, most of the US, but we love our international guests as well. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you, Tracy, as always, for the warm introduction. I'm happy to be here with all of you from all over the country and a few from outside of the country. Thanks for joining. As Tracy said earlier, we've both been with GoLean6Sigma.com since its inception, and we founded GoLean6Sigma.com with a clear purpose. We want to revolutionize the way people learn process improvement, making it easy for everyone everywhere to build their problem-solving muscles. And we have 3 core guiding values. We believe in cultivating community, that is you. We believe in having a servant's heart. We are here to be of service to you with these webinars. And we believe in having a trailblazing spirit. We are lifelong learners, and we are never complacent with the status quo. So let's put those values to work. Today's learning objectives are, after attending this webinar, that you'd be able to define standard work. You'd be able to describe the role of standard work in continuous improvement, to relate the downsides of neglecting standard work, to explain the benefits of standard work to others, and to identify a good method of maintaining standard work for you and your organization. So our agenda is first to define standard work, then discuss why it's important, why it's hard to maintain, and then 3 key success factors with standard work. And then we'll finish up with some tips and tricks of standard work. So my question for you, again, in the chat area, is what are some adjectives that come to mind when you consider the concept of standard work? So go ahead and enter your responses in the chat tab again, and just give some adjectives. How would you describe what you consider the concept of standard work? What adjectives come to mind? Tracy, what do you see?
Well, we've had 2 people say consistent. That's consistent.
Okay.
Efficient, uniform, excellence, variability, routine. Wow, these are really good adjectives. I actually thought that sometimes people have a misconception about standard work and they say boring or, great, mindless conformity or something like that. Daily activity, compliance, process flows, repeatable. So these are all great. Fans of standard work.
No, that's great. That's good. We never underestimate the quality of our listeners, Tracy. Never. So standard, taking the word standard is sort of an innocuous word. It has a lot of meanings. It can mean basic, if you're talking about your standard model. It could be a level of quality, as in that's not up to our standards. It can mean customary or familiar, as in that's the standard treatment. And that causes some confusion for some people. And then there's the word work. Work can mean getting things done. It can also mean functional, as in this thing works. Work can be an activity or a place you go to in the morning. So after having this long list of meanings, we want to get to the definition of what exactly is standard work. So what is standard work? It is a precise explanation of the current best practices for carrying out the steps of a process. So Jeff Liker, the author of The Toyota Way, also a guest on the Just-in-Time Cafe podcast, he uses the term current best way instead of best practice. And his issue is that the term best practice makes it sound like it's a done deal. We found the best practice and we're done. But with standard work, the opposite is true. It's just the beginning. Standard work is a baseline. It's a starting point. It will always be the current best practice, but we can always do better. So constantly working toward a current best way is a key driver for operational excellence. So standard work consists of recording a process, effectively communicating that process, and then using that record as a basis for continuous improvement. The chief architect of the Toyota production system, whose name was Taiichi Ohno, he's essentially the father of lean manufacturing. He's often quoted as saying, "Where there is no standard, there can be no Kaizen." And if you're not familiar with the word Kaizen, it means change for the good. But why not? Why can't you improve a process without a standard? I want to explore that concept. So without establishing or maintaining standards, this means that we're all figuring out our own best practices. When demand goes up, we improvise, we figure it out. Some people feel like standard work is rigid and inflexible. It feels like handcuffs, and who wants to work that way? So we get the job done. We might all be executing at really high standards. So what's the problem with that? So first off, many of you have probably tried to map processes only to get bogged down when you discovered there were lots of different methods. You probably start wondering how you're going to map the process when it's different depending on who you talk to. Sometimes you compromise. Well, let's map the high level, or let's go what the majority of people do. So what about when it comes to improvement? What changes, you have to make different changes, and how are you going to make those to the process? So now you're making variations of the process and changes to the variations of the process, and now you have even more fragmentation. And another essential ingredient in the continuous improvement world is mistake proofing. That's also called poka-yokes, or creating poka-yokes. And how are we going to prevent mistakes with a fragmented process? So how do you mistake proof a process if everyone does it differently? In this image, we've got color-coded systems for recycling. Well, if we don't know which recycling item goes where, mistakes lead to waste, literally in the case of recycling. But what if you're in a hospital? What if you have 2 nursing stations or more than 1 nursing station in the same hospital? And there's different methods and places to store patient information. Each station can have great visual management, but the variation could lead to patient harm. So you've all heard that hospitals have begun putting marks. It's not begun, it's a long time now. They put marks on patients' limbs, you know, in an effort to keep doctors from operating on the wrong arm or the wrong leg. But doctors can work at different hospitals and often do. And some hospitals use X to mark the limb to operate on. And some hospitals use X to mark the limb not to operate on. And that is a recipe for disaster. So even if the impact is not as vital as the health and safety of a patient, customers are going to feel the variation in your processes. So we need standard work to be able to mistake-proof a process. So why do most organizations struggle with the concept of standard work? It's simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy. It involves discipline. It involves accountability. If you ask people if there's a standard way to do a process, they'll probably say, yeah. You know, it's in a binder with all the other standard operating procedures. Do we even know where that is? We might follow it. Might have been a while since we last looked at it. And sometimes we're short on time, so we have to take a shortcut. And maybe those shortcuts are worth documenting, but we don't capture those either. So there's standards that we may have written, and then there's reality. The other issue is that standard work is a baseline, and it's a constant starting point. And that means that as soon as it's documented, we can figure out a better way. So we don't always write that down or tell anyone about it. And we leave old versions of standard work somewhere on a shelf or a drive. And we don't think about them anymore. We just keep tweaking the process and hoping that others will follow our lead. And sometimes we don't even know where the standard worksheet or the standard operating procedures are. And that means we're doing on-the-job training. And if you're doing on-the-job training, then whatever I know, I pass along to somebody else. And whatever I do wrong, I pass along to somebody else. And everyone's doing that. So you get more and more variation. So standards age immediately. So a question for you. What is your experience with standard work? So go ahead to the poll and answer either it's new to you, or you know what it is, but it's not being used in your workplace, or you're trying to use it, but you're slow to update standard work, or it's a baseline in your organization and how you improve your processes. So go ahead and make sure that poll is launched for you. Poll.
While you're doing that, Elizabeth, I'll just, some people did type in the chat window, but go ahead and re-vote on the poll. And we are seeing a lot, and that was the one I was going to pick as well. We are trying, but we're slow to update. I'm seeing that people, organizations that I've been helping are struggling a bit with, they're bought in, they agree, but it's a slow process. Okay, so 57% agreed with C. We are trying, but we're slow to update, followed by 23% or 10 people say it's how we baseline and improve our processes, which is awesome, which is why there's so many positive adjectives related to people on this webinar. And then we have 14% or 6 say, I know what it is, but we don't use it. And last, 7%, it's new to me.
Okay, good spread, and your suspicions were right. Most people are trying, but it's the update part doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, thank you guys for sharing. And let's go now over to 3 key success factors for making standard work work. So 1, make it easy to do. 2, start with 5S. And 3, shine a light on problems. So standard work is the opposite of handcuffs. It's actually liberating. It makes work life easy. It establishes a method for constantly making it even easier. And it means the instructions are always clear and we can update them to be even better. And we don't have to waste time figuring out the basics. So let's look at how we take advantage of this seemingly simple concept. So make it easy to do. These images are from a company called Ohno Foods based in Japan. And Tracy and I recently toured Ohno Foods, and their standard work culture was very strong, very powerful, and on display everywhere. And this particular board full of updates to standard work was in one of their cafeterias. And these are all documented improvements put forward by workers. And this one on the right was a simple shelf for workers to stand on to get to a vent. And the images on this board showed an incredible pride in the workforce. They were constantly making their workplace better, more comfortable, easier to work in, which led to better productivity and a better workplace, better work life. They were constantly updating their standard work. It was a great example. You also want to make standard work accessible. So another standard rule of standard work is that it should be physically posted in the place where work takes place. So standard work was on full display also when we toured manufacturing plants in Japan. This image comes from Mifune, a metal manufacturer. It's a Toyota Tier 2 manufacturer, and each worker station had standard work printed and posted and on display. But what about those of us that are not working in manufacturing plants? What about those of us that work online, work at our desk, work in cubicles, computers? What if our work area is a shared drive? We need to update our ideas of standard work. You know, what does it mean to post physical copies of standard work in the workspace? That's just not going to be the same for everyone. So use a method that works for you. The reality of standard work is the template was created back in the 1950s. The standard work template is coming up on its 70th birthday. It needs a facelift. So the internet, software, digital processes, YouTube videos did not exist back then in Taiichi Ohno's time. And since it was created at Toyota, it's perfect for repetitive manufacturing processes. And the major elements of standard work were originally established as including cycle time, you know, how long it took to do things, tack time, which is the measurement of customer demand, the sequence of the steps, we're most familiar with those, and then work in process, also known as WIP, the amount of materials, the parts, or information required at each workstation. But there's lots of administrative or back office processes that don't require all this information. You know, for many processes, what's key is to establish the sequence of steps. And if that's key, there's a ton of software applications out there that help you visualize your process. I'm just going to name a few. There's Process Street, there's Trello, there's Asana, there's Sweet Process. These are software platforms with checklists, with workflows, with standard operating procedures, and many of them are free, which is really nice. So there's also software programs that are designed specifically to document standard work. There's not a one-size-fits-all for how to document standard work. People in the industry have been updating and improving the standard work template itself, and so we can always do better. You know, consider software to manage standard work if you're in a digital transactional world or even a manufacturing world. Depending upon your industry, you may or may not be concerned with physical layout. So let's look at the idea of physical layout and what that means. So what is the workspace? If you have a physical layout, then a spaghetti map, also a good tool. So for each step, you can look at the distance traveled, the time it takes. You can change the standard layout. You can change how people move to get their jobs done. But what if your workspace is online? GoLeanSixSigma.com is a completely online company. We are virtual. There is no layout. Our shared workspace is Asana. We document and update workflows with each other every day. And that works for us. But it's important to consider your workspace and how you work when determining how to document standard work. Let's look at some of the essential information that's included in standard work, regardless of what you use as your template. So first, who is the process owner? Someone has to be accountable for the process being documented. They have to be involved and clear on updates to the process. Second, you've got to include standards. There's another use of that word. This means things like, you know, what's listed here. Acknowledge the customer within 1 minute of being seated, right? So this is the bistro. This is the Palma Bistro, the running case study in all of our training. And this is standard work for the server. The process is serving lunch. The process segment they're looking at is taking the order. The core process they're looking at is order to cash, right? So we're looking at major process, sub-process, and then process segment. And you would also list, you know, when it was created, when it was updated. But you want to point out standards, or it might be, you know, answer a customer email within 1 business day, right? So standards should be included in standard work. Then you want to include links to job aids. These can be a checklist. It could be laminate cards, photos, videos, but you reference them right in the standard work so people can always have ready access to them. Then you want to make standard work as visual as possible. The fastest way to explain things and make them clear is to include a visual. And that, we know we have a lot of options. Let's just take a look at a few of the ways that we do that. So we have so many more options than Taiichi Ohno did back in the 50s. We have pictures, we have charts, we have graphs, and we have other displays that can bring standard work documentation to life. The software options, I mentioned, provide venues for easily adding graphics, Zoom video instructions of those of you that use the platform we're using right now. Here's a bistro order ticket with a yellow space they created to indicate special instructions. They had a problem, sometimes the chef, people in the kitchen were missing that a customer wanted something special, you know, hold the mayo, and the kitchen wasn't always noticing them. So they created a space that's yellow to call that out, right? So that's part of their standard work. This one up on the top right, if you've never seen the video on how to fold a t-shirt in less than 3 seconds, it's a fascinating example of standard work. Below right, courtesy of Sally Toyster. She's the operational excellence leader for Marriott Hotels. And this photo shows standard work for back of the house storage. And her team, they worked on the layout, they photographed it for everyone to follow. And pictures just relay concepts faster. They also are essential for multilingual workforces. They can often provide a more accurate representation. It's better to see it than to have it described. I recently realized I was fielding questions from consultants asking for information that I kept thinking, but that's all on our website, you know, the information they're asking for. Then it dawned on me, they don't know what's there. So I set a task for myself in Asana to create a Zoom video of a walkthrough of our website. Then that would make part of our process of working with colleagues, you know, just to share that link. And it would only take 1.5 minutes. They could be aware of all of our training, the single modules, the webinars, the templates, the infographics, the glossary, and sharing that link can be part of our onboarding process, and we can update the sequence. Done, right? So that's easy for me to do and think about. Just even in your own homes, you know, my sister was struggling with my nephew. He was around 10 years old, and although he listened when she asked him to clean his room, he never cleaned it like she wanted it cleaned. And there would always be toys in the wrong place, the bed wasn't made right, all these things, until she realized he doesn't know what a clean room should look like. So she took a photo of what clean meant to her, and then he had something to shoot for. You know, he had standard work. Of course, at 10 years of age, he had zero interest in improving on standard work. But luckily, most of us don't work with 10-year-olds, and our colleagues would like a clear idea of how a process should look and feel and want to update it. The other thing is to access and update standard work regularly. So if you don't document the process, if you document it and then check it in a year, it's useless. You know, you're done with those old SOP binders, and you want to access standard work all the time, right? Daily, you should be looking at standard work. The workplace, the industry, the competition, the environment, and conditions are always changing. Processes should be updated to reflect those changes. You need to determine your own schedule for monitoring and updating standard work. You could use automatic reminders if that helps you, but people should be encouraged to update, improve it regularly. A business is a living organism, and you can treat it that way with standard work. So let's recap. Make it easy to do. Don't assume there's only one way to document standard work. Make the template or software work for you. Conduct PDCA on your standard work template or your standard work method. Include visuals that make sense. Give employees permission to make changes, right? It's the people who do the work who know what to improve. Ensure they have access. Let's move on to the second key, which is to start with 5S. You need to clean house first. Think about your own organization. Is your house a mess? That's a great metaphor for how to view our processes. You know, some people consider 5S to be really simple and really basic, and they want to get into the more sophisticated aspects of Lean, you know, Six Sigma. But How can you improve a system when you don't even know where the broom goes? You know, a visual workplace goes hand in hand with standard work. You should be able to see the standards. If you can see them, then you can improve them. And as you see here, I've put stuff from a hotel. I've got your desktop, hopefully not your desktop. You've got, you know, tools where they're accessible in manufacturing, or even just your desk drawer. You know, what does that look? Can you find anything in your desk drawer? That's always a good indicator. So start with 5S. On the left, visual workspace, right on the wall of a hospital room, right outside a room at the Red Cross Hospital. And this is in Ishikaga, Japan, where Tracy and I also toured. And there is standard work listed right on the side of the door for cleaning hands. We could zoom in and you could see exactly what they want you to do before going in to see a patient. And in contrast, on the right, there's parts laid out, you know, for by day of the week. And this was at, again, the Mifune metal plant. So making these processes visual is part of creating standard work. You're also going to use it for navigation, right? These are examples of navigation visuals. Right? On the left is that path through Mifune that we walked to see the manufacturing plant. That kept us safe at a safe distance as we walked through and looked at all of their different stamping machines. In the middle is a color-coded floor plan. That was part of the Red Cross Hospital in the town of Ashikaga that I mentioned. So color-coded, you knew where you were. And then on the right, just an example from Process Street. And they've got, you know, as an example, listing of an onboarding process. Again, that's navigation. How does this work? Where do you go? What's next? So recapping, starting with 5S, the more visual a process is, the easier it is to both understand and improve. You can make both physical and digital processes visual. So clean house first. It'll help you start defining your standard work. The third key for standard work success is to shine a light on problems. So whether employees feel comfortable acknowledging process issues in your organization says a lot about your culture and about your potential for improvement. So think about how your organization handles problems. No problem is a problem. This is a famous quote, again, by Taiichi Ohno. And the original quote is, having no problems is the biggest problem of all. And what he meant by that is that we are surrounded by problems. And if we don't see them, we're either not looking hard enough. And if we're saying there's no problem, we might even be trying to hide problems. And there's a lot of reasons that we do that. You know, we're human. And most of us, or a lot of us, are taught that failure is a sign of weakness. And if so, then we'd be inclined to hide it. I don't want anyone to see that I failed on this. I'd like to just hide it. And if we're measured by our success, then we don't want to point out when things go wrong. In fact, we might start pointing the finger, right? The blame game. So the upshot is, you know, if we're using those, then we are losing the lessons learned, right? If we are not encouraging and acknowledging our problems, then we're not going to learn from them. And that's a huge loss. And then we miss out on capturing crucial updates to standard work. So how is standard work treated? Culture is created by what is tolerated and promoted. And this is a great quote by Dr. Henry Cloud. And it's a good question to ask yourself. What is tolerated in your organization? What is promoted? If there's a culture of blame as opposed to a culture of improvement, that's a problem. So one simple change that you can make is to thank people for pointing out problems. Just say thank you. When people write us to point out something in our materials that we could do better, we thank them. I'm hugely appreciative. They took the time. They're trying to help us improve our standard work. That was a gift. And you should do the same thing with your colleagues and your direct reports. Thank them. If we hear of problems, then that's a huge opportunity and we get to fix those problems. So take those opportunities. And I'm going to borrow a new term I just learned from a woman named Liz McCartney, and that is constructive discontent. And Liz is the CEO of a nonprofit called SBP. It's the St. Bernard Project. And they are a phenomenal nonprofit that works. They started in New Orleans, and they started right after Hurricane Katrina. And they're mission is to reduce the time between disaster, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, things like that, and recovery, you know, when people can get back into their homes. And she works with a huge rotating team of volunteers that show up after hurricanes and floods. So they have this big fluctuating workforce. They have lots of people who are completely unfamiliar with process improvement. And what she found was that they did not like the term continuous improvement. They took a distinct dislike to that term. And they told her it felt like being on one of those hamster wheels, one of those just endlessly spinning your wheels, it felt like. So what they developed with her was this term constructive discontent. And I think that's a brilliant paradox. And we should always be discontent with the status quo. We should always seek a constructive way forward. It lays the foundation for standard work. You know, we can always do this better. We can always do this faster. We can absolutely come at this in a better way. And she also got into the habit of thanking people for problems. And it also caused her to screen employees for people who could handle that, right? Handle that problems were going to be showcased, handle that we were going to talk about them and highlight them to figure out how to solve them. And she found that not everybody was comfortable with that. So they really reinforced that when they brought people on, even if they were volunteers, because they wanted to have a good experience. So having that constructive discontent was hugely important, to have that mindset that you should always be discontent in a constructive way. So let's recap. You want to establish constructive discontent, right? You want to constantly be thinking, what's the better way? You want to say thank you. People point out problems. It's a gift. They took the time. You want to thank them for that. Encourage them to keep doing it, because that's the way you learn. That's the way you get things better. That's the way you get the lessons that you can incorporate and bring back into standard work. That is just a huge piece. So let's recap the 3 keys to success. Make it easy to document and update standard work. Start by cleaning house. Use 5S to understand, what is this process? How do I make it visual? That will help you start building standard work. And lastly, shine a light on problems. Make it safe for people to point out problems. Make sure your culture is encouraging it, and it's a way of doing business, and it's a way of working. So let's talk about, what are the benefits, right? What do we get out of this standard work? You know, we've been talking about how great it is, but just looking back, it makes waste more visible. Makes standards easy to follow. It's easy to see how your process is doing. It also makes training easier, right? Think about onboarding, right? Instead of having to remember all the sort of trips and tricks of a particular job, it's all documented, and it's been improved over time. So we've got videos, we've got visuals, we've got ways to make it easier for both us and them, right? It takes effort on our part to train people, and it takes effort on their part to get to know how we do things. So it makes it easier to train. It also makes it easier to scale, right? So once that's accessible and it's been improved, now you can scale easier. It also promotes mistake proofing. Making work visible means you're making it easier to do the right thing. And that's what you want. You want people to be able to do the right thing. You want it easy to avoid mistakes. It also streamlines problem solving. It's part of doing the work. We address the standard, we improve it all the time. And that means you reduce variation. Since the standard is accessible, updatable, everyone can follow it, that means we are doing things the same way. We don't have so much variation in our process, which means it increases return on investment. You waste less time chasing errors. You waste less time cleaning up mistakes. You waste less time reteaching people. And that increases customer satisfaction. Ultimately, customers want to get the same experience every time they work with you. And if you're using standard work, then that's going to increase the chance that that's what they experience. So let's go to another poll and talk about this one, which is, what is the biggest challenge to standard work in your organization? And you've got some choices here. You could say, we don't have a good standard work template or an update method. People like to do things their own way. We always have time to do things twice, but we're too busy to fix them. Our culture does not encourage acknowledgement of problems. Or click other if none of these really capture what you're experiencing. I'm going to go and launch this now. And Tracy, what do you generally see?
You know, these are really good options. And I see that people don't have time. So often I see that people just, you know, they don't have time to create standard work, and they'll do things twice, but they don't have time to fix them. And then the last one too, our culture does not encourage acknowledgement of problems, which is really a big challenge, because now you've got some culture work to do before you can even start working with tools like standard work or, you know, project charters or A3s, because you can't even acknowledge this problem. So both of those stick out to me as really big challenges. Like, I actually feel sorry for people that work in organizations like that, sadly.
Do you find people sort of assume the standard work is just handcuffs? It's going to inhibit creativity?
Not always. I don't see it that way. You know, I find more often there is somebody that has all the tribal knowledge and they see it as a threat. So, because now they see that they have to share their knowledge and they don't want to, which is interesting.
Okay, so let's see what we got from these guys.
Okay.
And share the results. Okay, what do you see?
All right, 48% people like to do things their own way. So yeah, I didn't get a lot of agreement on that one, but most people went with B. Half the people went with B, followed by A. We don't have a good standard work template or update method. Yeah, I think, you know, getting a commitment to what will be used across the board can be a challenge. C is 15%, which is, you know, we always have time to do things twice, but we don't have time to actually fix it. And D, 8%, our culture does not encourage acknowledgement, and 5% said other.
So just coming back to a lot of what we talked about today, and that is, number one, make it easy to document and improve. Make these things accessible. Make the template accessible, make the process accessible, and use a method that suits you. Like I said, standard work is coming up on its 70th birthday, and it's really morphed over time, and it should. Also, start with 5S. Start with cleaning your own house, making sure you know how things should work before you start documenting standard work. Thank employees for pointing out problems. Make that part of the normal way of doing business. Always thank people. That's great, awesome. We're going to take that and we're going to see what we can do with it, because the problem, that report is a gift. And then use it and update it on a regular basis. This isn't something to revisit yearly or twice a year, or even quarterly. This is regular. This should be a regular daily activity that everybody is doing. So call to action. There's a few things you can do. You can download your standard work template. There's a couple on our website. There's also the spaghetti chart. If you have a workplace, a workspace, a physical workspace, you want to look at how that is treated. To think about the different standard work methods out there and find one that works for your business, for your organization, for your process. Watch the 5S webinar. There's a great free webinar that Tracy put together on, I think it was the joy of cleaning up. Is that right, Tracy?
The joy of tidying up.
Yeah, she had a little Marie Kondo flair to that one. And there goes Tracy, right? Oh, there you went off the screen, Tracy. So, you know, you've got a lot of options here, plenty on our website, plenty on other sites as well. So we covered what is standard work, why is it important, why is it so hard to maintain, and what are some success factors that go into maintaining standard work, and some tips and tricks for standard work. So let's go. Before, you guys can ask any question you want, and while you're forming your questions, Tracy and I are going to go over what's coming up and what also is available to you. First off, you should get certified, right? You can get your green belt. There's all kinds of training available at Lean Six Sigma, at goleansixsigma.com, and you've got a coupon code for 20% off. So all you lucky webinar watchers today use 20 standard to get 20% off on anything, and that will expire August 24th. So get in there and use it soon. Tracy, you can talk about our Problem Solvers Toolkit.
Yeah, this is our Problem Solvers Toolkit book, a surprisingly simple guide to your Lean Six Sigma journey. So you can buy it on Amazon.com, but if you enroll for Greenbelt, you get the ebook for free.
Yeah, so absolutely many different forms for that. Get it free if you're training. Upcoming webinar, Tracy, want to describe that one?
Yeah, so next month we're going to be doing an introduction to value stream mapping. And so this is a practical and highly effective tool to learn to see process flow. Very popular in the lean world in terms of a highly effective tool. And we're going to be talking about the basics of value stream mapping. It's definitely a foundation for managing process flows, making it better, and being able to see what's really happening with processes. I'm so looking forward to doing that one.
Also, if you have not checked into the Just in Time Cafe podcast or heard the latest episode, please tune in. This one was Mary Beth Germain, part of one of our participants or our colleagues we met on our Japan study trip recently. She is the director of operational innovation at Exeter Health Systems, and she has a great description of using lean to lean out the lean accreditation process in healthcare, which is inspiring because it ended up with people requesting audits, which was incredible. So a really fun episode, great interview there. All right, that brings us back to questions, Tracy.
All right, we have a question from Eric, and he asks, what is the best way to get upper management to support standard work? So that could actually be interpreted a few ways. Are they not following standard work, or are they actually not supporting standard work? So maybe you can answer both, Elizabeth.
So there's a couple of different things going on here, because leadership obviously makes a huge difference in how standard work is treated. And part of it's I always struggle with, you can't make anyone do things, certainly least of all leaders, but you can expose them to what's great about it. So if you can often start with a 5S of a troublesome area, 5S it, and let people know the before and after. You know, what was the cycle time before? What was the error rate before? So showcase something with standard work and visual management that makes, gets people to take notice. There's also there's this webinar, right? You can pass this webinar along or do a lunch and learn with a bunch of folks. People use these webinars a lot to educate their direct reports. Also, they use them for leadership groups. You can also, Tracy, you just did a webinar recently on an executive overview, right?
Yes, the power of Lean Six Sigma for executives.
And that really addresses leaders straight on with, why should you support this? What's in it for you? What's in it for the organization? And it's really powerful and compelling. So things like that will help. There's education. There's also just experience, having them experience what happened in a place where there was standard work. So I always start small, and something that's meaningful, a workspace or a shared drive or something that drives everybody crazy and wastes a lot of people's time, because it's almost there's a metaphor of the boiling frog, the frog that sits in the warm water, and then the water just gets hotter and hotter until they're boiling, but they don't really notice it because it's gradual. We get used to living in some chaos, and we get used to doing things twice instead of taking the time to actually fix it. So when someone fixes something and, you know, turns the stove off or takes the thorn out of the lion's paw, they suddenly go, whoa, okay, well that actually is much better. I had no idea how bad that had gotten. So those are some helpful, hopefully that's helpful to you.
Wonderful, thank you. And Jeff says, great webinar today, thank you. There are no other questions, only Eric posted a question, but I will say that the slides are already uploaded on the Standard Work webinar website post on our website, and the video will be following in a few days. So if nobody has any more questions, then I think that will wrap it up. And oh, by the way, Eric says he loves the book. He got it for free with the course, loved it so much, he bought it on Amazon too.
You're a good man, Eric, and you're very wise. You make good decisions in life, clearly. Oh, thank you guys for joining us. If you have more questions, here is an email for you to reach out to us. You can download free tools, templates, infographics. There's a ton of good stuff on our website, so come visit.
Yes, and I'll just say, please share your feedback with us. Complete that survey when the webinar ends. We use that to get additional feedback on webinars, as well as what you thought of the webinar today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.